Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Howl's Moving Castle from 2004. This continues my quest to review all of the films released by Studio Ghibli. This is kind of a unique film in my Studio Ghibli series in that I've never liked this movie like ever. I saw it the weekend it came out. I think I saw it the day it came out in US theaters. I very much have tried to watch it many times under the guise that, hey, maybe I'm wrong. And this film has never won me over. Ever. And watching it this time, at this point, I have actually seen everything that Hayao Miyazaki directed, that Studio Ghibli made, that Isao Takahata made, seen everything. And I thought maybe I will like this movie more. No, still not working. It's never gonna happen. I just need to accept that I will never like this movie. And I think this is probably Hayao Miyazaki's worst directed film. The one thing I think that should be brought up is that he did help write the script and develop it when he came on board, but originally it was supposed to be directed by Mamoru Hosoda, whose name I'm probably mispronouncing, who eventually would go on to direct The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and did the first two Digimon movies. And he was originally attached to direct this. I've heard conflicting reports about how far along in the production process he was. I've heard some people say it was early on. I've heard some people say it was a last minute switch and they were like about to go into production. If it was about to go into production, you could kind of understand it and think of it more like what happened to Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro with the Hobbit films, where Peter Jackson was kind of stuck making these Hobbit movies. But Hayao Miyazaki came out of retirement to direct this film, and I don't know if he kind of did it because he felt he needed to and the studio needed to make a film to make money, and they didn't want to be out all the production costs of pre-production with this director, and to like kind of excuse the quality of this movie and how it doesn't really feel like his other films. I don't know how much that necessarily had to do with it. You look at a film like Ratatouille, which Brad Bird wasn't the original person developing it, and he wasn't originally supposed to be the director, and that movie's really good. And I think Howl's Moving Castle doesn't really do that, but it also feels like an older auteur or the end of a great director's career when he's making kind of these lesser works that have all the tropes and have all the ideas that you've seen going throughout their career, but now you can see them falling apart and more drawn out, not having that amazing, well-told, well-built storytelling that made you fall in love with them. And Howl's Moving Castle represents kind of all of that and not showing me the things I liked about Hayao Miyazaki with the storytelling angle, but it does show me the amazing technical animator that he always was, even in this movie that I didn't like as much. A girl named Sophie who works in a hat shop and loves working in a hat shop. And then one day she's walking and this kind of magician sorcerer guy, Howl, sees her and helps her get away from these guards. But unfortunately, the Wizard of the Waste sees her do this and turns her into an old woman, just like cuz. There's no real reason for it. And so now Sophie is an old woman and she leaves her hat shop job in secret and goes and tries to find Howl and his moving castle. And so she eventually does and becomes the cleaning lady in the moving castle. She kind of just insists she be the cleaning lady and it kind of just works out for her. No, for real, that's what happens. And then she meets this flame fire person who helps run the moving castle. She starts falling in love with Howl and taking over their lives as she develops more and more of a relationship with him, and they fall more and more in love as she's trying to stop Howl from being a demon, find a cure for the spell that she is under, and hopefully not get involved in the escalating conflict of war that's happening throughout the land. When I watch this film, even though I might not like it on a storytelling level, the animation is amazing and it's very beautiful to watch. It definitely has that whimsical, imaginative, incredible feeling, and that incredible feeling to animation that Hayao Miyazaki had throughout all of his films. I don't think any of the character designs are as memorable. I'd say these are probably his least memorable character designs of any of his films, but on a technical animation level, it's just as great as it is through all of his other films. And he uses more CG stuff in this film than he did through any of his other films, particularly with the moving castle, which I think looks really cool and has a really almost a stop motion-y, demented, weird movement kind of quality to it that I don't think you'd really expect from him. It's a little surprising. He uses also some CG stuff with moving the camera around and things like that, while still doing a lot lot of traditional animation, of course. It's still a wonder to watch. I think all of his films are amazing. Just on a technical level, a wonder to behold the sights of the movie, and I think Howl's Moving Castle continues that amazing tradition. But I see Hayao Miyazaki films not just for the animation. I think it's been pretty clear through my reviews of all of these films that I like him as well as a storyteller. Now, the character of Sophie is the kind of character who really should have an arc to her. She gets turned into an old woman, and when she's first turned into an old woman, she doesn't love it or anything, but very quickly she goes, well, you know, I got old lady clothes, it's cool. And you're just kind of sitting there like, oh, so that's it? Okay. But she doesn't want to be an old lady forever, but she's kind of okay with it for far too much of the movie, to the point where it's like she doesn't like grow to get used to it. She kind of gets used to it and slightly complains about it at the beginning, but there's not a real arc there. It's not like she was this spoiled, annoying teenage girl and then she gets turned into an old lady and suddenly she learns, you know, the power of love. She wasn't really the worst person in the world. She seemed kind of a meek kind of personality, and then she gets turned into an old woman. She never felt that beautiful before. You're not really saying anything about beauty. What are you saying exactly with this? I don't get it at all. And I understand this is based on a book by Diana Wynne Jones, and so maybe that's more of her fault, but Hayao Miyazaki has changed things before because he wanted them to work for the movie. And really, if you look at a lot of his stories, he usually has the character go through an arc, and it just felt like no one really goes through an arc. Howl kind of does, but she didn't feel like enough of a participant. Had there been an arc there, you could kind of excuse it because you'd be so with her, but you're not really with her as much. She's a weird protagonist. She's probably the least strong protagonist of any of his films. Certainly she grows to a certain degree, but it's a little too subtle. I don't really understand what he's exactly doing. Is he trying to play with his own genre and failing completely, or is he just wanting to go about it a different way? I don't think she was set up in a certain way that like I really was with her. It felt like I was just getting to know her and they changed her into an old lady. Certainly a lot of the opening of his films go rather quickly, but the flow of this whole film is rather odd. A lot of his films feel episodic, but usually the character arc gets you through it and connects all of that throughout the films. And in Howl's Moving Castle, there's nothing to connect them. So it just feels like this episodic mess of a movie. It doesn't feel as together as I'm really used to from him. For the film that came after Spirited Away, you'd think that this would be better. When I think of his filmography, post Spirited Away is maybe the weakest period. And I think starting off with probably his worst movie. I really don't like the American voice cast at all. Particularly Billy Crystal is really annoying. I didn't even watch it again in the American cast because I just can't do that ever again, ever. Pete Docter actually directed the English voice cast rather than John Lasseter, who directed the English voice cast of the previous two Hayao Miyazaki films. Pete Docter did it this time. I guess Lasseter was busy with the cinematic masterpiece that would be Cars, and he couldn't do it. The thing with the director who would have done this film, it's another sad note where Studio Ghibli tried to find someone who could have been more of a successor and failed yet again, which is unfortunate. I felt like he could have probably worked within Studio Ghibli, but I don't know exactly what happened, and kind of had to fall on Hayao Miyazaki. Once you get with older directors, when you think of older Scorsese or older John Ford or directors who clearly have passed their prime to a certain degree, he's not using his storytelling techniques to the best of their ability. You can tell it's a Hayao Miyazaki film, but it's not as pronounced and as lovely as it really should be. I think he was much better at doing it that way. And you can definitely tell from the European architecture and design that's going on throughout this film that this is kind of more closely related to Castle in the Sky than any of his other films. Castle in the Sky worked a lot better and was more fun to watch and more fun as a viewer. And Howl's Moving Castle, I never really got how it had the reputation it got. Like, it got nominated for Best Animated Feature. A lot of people loved it. I felt like it was more because of the afterglow of Spirited Away and how great and amazing that movie was and how it got all this Academy attention and mainstream attention. So everyone wanted to kind of hitch their wagon to Miyazaki at the time. And the only major critic who disliked this movie was Roger Ebert, who was known to know the work of Hayao Miyazaki fairly well. I noticed most of the reviews that are praising it are from critics who maybe know Spirited Away and Mononoke, but that's about it. And this film just has too much of an episodic odd structure. The anti-war thing, just adding another thing onto this movie that it just does not need, was during the post 9/11 era where everybody had to make a statement about the Iraq War for some reason, unfortunately. I never really liked when authors and filmmakers did do statements on that. It always felt heavy-handed. It never really worked as a story. It was never really entertaining, and it never actually really said much about the war other than like, hey, I'm against it, and I'd be like, yeah, I get it. I've heard it a lot of times. I could tell what was going on at the time, but it was so drilled home to me. I was in college at the time, and I remember just tuning out a lot of it because it was like, yeah, I don't agree with it either, but like, shut up for 2 seconds and like, think about storytelling. The war elements of this just like felt like an afterthought to it. I felt like Princess Mononoke said more about war than Howl's Moving Castle or Nausicaa. Those are films that really say something about war and conflict, and this was just like, war is pretty bad. This is kind of the worst degree of what Takahata became, and when you look at something like The Tale of Princess Kaguya. But The Tale of Princess Kaguya has enough interesting animation and odd things going on, but it's also emulating a kind of storytelling that we're not really used to anymore, and it is kind of more of a difficult watch. But I think what makes Kaguya different than Howl's Moving Castle is Kaguya is interesting. Kaguya is like no animated movie I've ever seen before. And Howl's Moving Castle reminds me of better animated movies. It reminds me of Hayao Miyazaki movies I like. When Kaguya and what Takahata did when he became an older director is he became much more experimental. It was just a lot more interesting to watch because you can at least respect him for what he's doing. I don't love Kaguya, right? But I still respect the hell out of it. It's just an amazingly impressive movie. Howl's Moving Castle isn't that way. When I watch Howl's Moving Castle, I just think like, okay, this is like, God, I watched all these. It still is a Studio Ghibli film, definitely, but it's kind of the worst example of a Studio Ghibli film and a Hayao Miyazaki film. It just doesn't have as much to latch onto. That Sophie didn't really have a purpose because all these odd background things are going on. It feels so random and everything. She wasn't connecting the story. So it almost felt like all the pieces were almost there, just not as organized as usual. But Howl's Moving Castle, I think, is probably the worst Hayao Miyazaki film because when you talk about Hayao Miyazaki, it's that he was this master storyteller and that he studied storytelling. He loved storytelling and loved doing it with animation that was imaginative and amazing and quirky and crazy and experimental. But when you take that amazing storyteller away, sure, it still has all those things to it, but it just doesn't thrill me and amaze me and show an animation director who brought in all these things to animation that no one had done before. It kind of just shows like, sure, that's a really impressive animated movie, but I think we expect more, especially coming off of Spirited Away. He delivers his worst movie. It's definitely like his biggest misstep. Howl's Moving Castle will forever probably be my least favorite, and now that I know more about Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki than I did before, I can honestly say that opinion has not changed. So if you have seen Howl's Moving Castle and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Check out my Studio Ghibli review playlist where I have, actually now it is complete, I've actually reviewed all of the films of Studio Ghibli. I'm going to re-review the very first Studio Ghibli film I ever reviewed ever, which was a long time ago. I'm not taking that review down, but I am going to re-review it anyway, which is Ponyo. That will be up very, very shortly. But if you'd like to check out any of the other Studio Ghibli reviews, please click on that annotation below. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.